Chapter 12. Corey's predictions about the road were getting boring. Not the place, but the state of mind. Every night he'd return and say, "It'll never hold out through the winter." I tried to console him. "If it washes out, we can pack our grub in on the horse." That was before the water got really high, and before we even had a horse. "Wonder why the county doesn't do something," Corey wondered. "They have." "What?" "They've posted signs at either end. Road closed. Travel at your own risk." My noble husband's philosophy was that the government's failure was no excuse for citizen apathy. He began scooping out the ditches. When he was unavailable, I, his helpmate, was assigned the task. A big order it was. In my rain gear and his rubber boots, 2 sizes too big, I'd direct water, scoop out uprooted trees and the like. All the while I kept my eyes open for the lost letter. It was amazing how quickly the romance of country living wore thin. And still, the floods came. Corey became increasingly concerned about us being completely stranded, unable to go to his jobs, without access to emergency services, fire trucks, and ambulances. He was also concerned about the children getting to school. "Why don't you visit the neighbors and find out what the situation with the county is?" My first face-to-face interaction about the road was with Mrs. Carter, the strawberry lady. I was scooping out the ditches. She was driving down the road. Correction, she was speeding down the road. The Carter family always sped down the road like bats out of Satan's barn. When she saw me, she slammed on the brakes and pulled up. I inquired about the status of the road. She was very informative. She laid the blame on city folks. They come out, riding around, enjoying the scenery, tearing up our roads. And the county does nothing but send out a scraper in the middle of the summer. But that's only when we call and complain. I was puzzled. I'd heard that she was a devoted Christian whom one would expect to go the second mile. But she argued that to go the second mile, you needed a road, and in order to have that, you had to call the county and complain. As I watched her race off, I felt uncertain about my responsibilities. That evening, Arlo had further information. Highland Road doesn't actually belong to the county. I scoffed at the idea. After all, hadn't our real estate agent lovingly assured us that even though our title didn't state as much, Highland was indeed a county road? In fact, in the next year, according to our real estate agent, it was on the county docket to be greatly improved. Arlo scoffed back. Was I so naive to believe a real estate agent? The next time I saw Mrs. Carter, she informed me that according to the old-timers, and they should know, 23 years ago, Highland Road had been registered as a county road. "So you can tell your Mr. Know-it-all dairyman he doesn't know what he's talking about." I detected a note of animosity and started wondering. Arlo's rebuttal was that the old-timers, and he was one of them, and just for my information, Mrs. Carter was not, had suspected that the registration money had not ended up in the Clackamas County coffers as intended, but in certain Happy Valley pockets. And then he confirmed that my suspicions were correct. Mrs. Carter's 2 sons were on Arlo's lazy kids list. I wondered if they were guilty of stealing rides on Arlo's ponies, like Sig. On only one thing did my 2 neighbors agree. It was imperative that I call the county and complain. But before I got around to it, I was confronted with an even more pressing problem. Mrs. Johnson called. "Just wanted to let you know that I have ordered my phone transferred so you can order yours hooked up." Since I was in my don't put off until tomorrow mood, I called the phone company, only to receive a crushing blow. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Gustafsson, but we will not be able to give you a phone." I was aghast. "I don't want you to give me a phone. I just want you to transfer the phone we have in town out here." "I'm sorry. We have no lines available into Happy Valley." But there must be some mistake. I called before our move and was informed there would be no problem, except we might not get a one-party line right away. My only instructions were to call when we were ready to be hooked up. "Just a moment and I'll check." The pause was long and ominous. I could imagine Corey's reaction. He would put the blame squarely on me, which is where it belonged. Another voice came on the line. "Did you fill out an order?" "Order? I've never filled out an order for a phone. I just called and asked for one, and pretty soon a man came out and installed it, and then you sent me a bill." "I'm sorry, but—" Finally, the dismal truth surfaced. A phone had been available at the time I called, but since then, more phones had been installed in the district, and there were requests for more. Happy Valley is one of the fastest-growing areas. Now, if you'd moved a little further out, like to Boring, for instance— Is there nothing we can do? Only in case of extreme emergency. Now that was something I could sink my teeth into. I said if she needed an emergency, we could certainly create one. Without a phone, Corey would have no business, and would make no money with which to buy food, and ultimately we would starve. If that's not an emergency. The operator said she was sorry. The phone clicked off. I picked it up again. It was dead. Corey's reaction that evening was, "No phone, we have to have a phone." "I know that, dear, but the phone company doesn't." "How long before we can expect a phone?" "Maybe 6 months." I didn't dare repeat all the operator's words. Maybe a year, maybe 2, no promises. We thought up a million wild schemes, including moving back to town. But our house already had a tenant, who was no doubt enjoying our phone. There was nothing to do but to grit our teeth and pray. The pastor expressed his deepest concern at the prayer meeting. "My goodness, had I thought about it, I would have told you to inquire about a phone right away." I gritted my teeth. "Well, I did, but—" Mr. Miller interrupted. "What a pity. The young people won't be able to communicate." I could imagine Freya and Sig's response to that. Mr. Miller had a bright idea. "Don't hesitate to come over and use our phone." Anna said, "But dear, that's 2.5 miles. It beats having to go 4 miles to Fred Meyer, and we wouldn't charge them." He looked at Anna for her approval on that. The pastor spoke up. "That would be fine until your road washes out. When do you suppose that'll be?" A deacon said, "What did people do before they had telephones?" An usher said, "They used carrier pigeons." The head of the women's quilting committee said, "Now there's an idea." Finally, we got down to prayer. The pastor said, "Dear Lord, Corey doesn't have a phone. Without a phone, Corey will have no business, which means he won't make any money to buy food, and—" As we left, I heard someone say to someone else confidentially, "I always did think they should have bought that place in Boring." In thinking back, I'm sure that nobody deliberately asked for an emergency, but prayer sometimes produces surprising results, even though they are sometimes further down the road. In the meantime, Corey came up with a substitute. He had his calls transferred to his brother Ragnar's house, who came out every day to help load the truck and work on the equipment. As Ragnar would leave, he would ask, "Got any calls you want me to make?" I always had at least 2. "Yeah, call the telephone company and tell them we're having an emergency, and call the county and complain." Meanwhile, the water in the ditches got higher, and it became obvious where a washout would occur, between the 2 entrances to Arlo's property. Of all the people on the road, only Corey seemed to be making a concerted effort, to which the others on the road responded, "Work on the road? That's what we pay taxes for." Mrs. Carter pointed out that those who benefited most should provide the most. I was concerned and suggested to Arlo, "Maybe we can dump in some of the junk from the barn." Arlo laughed again. "You sure got taken on that deal. Johnson told me that he had offered to haul all the junk to the dump, but you refused. You probably thought there were antiques there, but that junk has been gone over a dozen times. The only thing of value was the myrtle wood." I could feel my face turning the color of my knee socks. I told Corey, "Maybe Arlo's got good insurance. Maybe he gets more money when the milk doesn't get out than when it does." Corey pointed out the irony. "Arlo won't be inconvenienced. By going out the upper entrance, he can get to town, and by the lower, he can get to the valley." I felt like I'd just been stung.